Good afternoon, everyone. We're about to start our fourth hearing this morning, and the hearing is on the human rights situation of young people in Guyana. This hearing was requested by civil society, a number of civil society movements in Guyana, and in that case, you would start first. And we welcome the state representative of the state of Guyana, who's here present. We're very grateful for your attendance. You will each have 20 minutes to present, and then we would make comments or ask questions if we are so inclined. And please look out for the flags or time that will warn you when you have 5 minutes, 3 minutes, and 1 minute. Without any further ado, I call on the petitioners to make their presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Madam President.
You state your names as you speak for the record.
Yes. Commissioner, State Representative. Good afternoon, all. Allow me to introduce myself as head of the delegation before you. My name is chnrY Rodriguez. I'm the Social Change Coordinator of the Society Against Sexual. Good afternoon, all. Introducing myself, my name is chnrY Rodriguez. I'm the Social Change Coordinator of the Society Against Sexual Orientation Discrimination and the coordinator of the Guyana Equality Forum, the GEF, which is a civil society network working cohesively to achieve equality and realize human rights for all Guyanese. We'll be represented here today by 3 member organizations as petitioners: the Guyana National Youth Council, GNYC, SASAD, and the Guyana Responsible Parenthood Association's Youth Advocacy Movement, GRPA's YAM. We thank the Commission for the opportunity to be heard at this session. The thematic presentation which follows will be on the human rights situation affecting young persons in Guyana. Focus will be on lack of implementing policies and laws that will guarantee the upliftment of youth, protection of their rights, and citizen security in the state. SASAD addresses LGBT youth issues as it relates to the bullying and school dropouts, unemployment and workplace discrimination, and rights with mental and sexual health disparities. Ms. Twinkle Bassoon, here on my right, trans rights activist and member of the Guyana Trans United, will present on behalf of SASAD. GRPA's YAM will focus on the deficiencies in comprehensively addressing sexual and reproductive health and rights for youth, and the impediments to the reintegration of teenage mothers in public schools. Mr. Kobe Smith presents on behalf of his organization as Vice President. GNYC draws attention to the shortcomings against youth and the gaps in the National Youth Policy in addressing human rights for Guyanese youth, and how the state, particularly the penal and judicial systems, could improve in its modus operandi towards youth in contact with the law. And to my far right, Ms. Nikita Ford, member of the Board of Trustees of GNYC, presents on behalf of the Council. Commissioners, the GF believes that after 2 years in government, this hearing provides an opportunity to attain answers on why the delay and slow response for social change as it relates to the issues that will be brought up. Without further ado, Twinkle.
Bullying in schools, unemployment, workplace discrimination, and access to health care are some of the main issues that LGBT youth faces. Commissioners, currently there are no laws, policies, or mechanisms in Guyana that protect or offer redress to youth who suffer stigma and discrimination in education system. Many LGBT youth have reverted to dropping out of school due to continued stigma they would face on a daily basis from both staff and students alike. Some of these acts have been reported to have happened in clear view of teachers who often do very little to curtail these behaviors. In some instances, the discrimination of LGBT students are from the teachers themselves and in plain and open view for others to witness. The Ministry of Education's policy on the Code of Conduct for Teachers under Part D on the commitment to students states, teachers cannot discriminate on the grounds of ability, race, color, or creed. It does not have any protective clause in it for LGBT youth. While no law or policy exists that specifically prevent LGBT persons from accessing education, many LGBT Guyanese reportedly leave the education system early due to transphobic and homophobic bullying and discrimination, thereby preventing them from practically realizing their right to education. The Guyana Trans United, a local NGO that works for the protection and rights of transgender persons in Guyana, has recorded 2 cases in 2016 where teachers and school officials were victimizing students for their sexual orientation and gender identity. The teachers believed that these students' behavior were against their religious beliefs. In October 2015, SASA documented a case from a 16-year-old girl who was expelled from a public secondary school in the capital city due to the issues the school administration had with her identity as a lesbian. From not attaining their full potential in schools, these now vulnerable youth are driven into poverty to fend for themselves, and some come into contact with the law. SASAD and GTU have observed that unemployment and underemployment is especially high among LGBT youth in Guyana because they drop out of school. As a result of homophobic and transphobic bullying, lack of normal qualifications significantly limit their options for employment. Given their limited prospects for formal employment, LGBT youths are driven to the sex trade as a means of survival. Trans persons represent a large portion of sex workers in Guyana. Over a period of 3 years, 5 trans sex workers ranging from age 17 to 26 were brutally murdered by partners and clients, with only one perpetrator to date is before the courts of Guyana. LGBT youth who are fortunate to find themselves in the workforce are forced to mask their sexual orientation or gender identity to attain and keep their jobs. Very often, when their LGBT identity is revealed, workplace discrimination ensues. In the laws of Guyana, Section 4.2 of the Prevention of Discrimination Act 1997 protects persons from discrimination in relation to right to work on several grounds, but does not expressly include sexual orientation and gender identity as protected categories from discrimination. LGBT youths are continuously exposed to violence, have expressed feelings of emotion and mental instability, and in most cases have attempted or considered suicide. Guyana Trans United has recorded and served 6 transgender youths who were diagnosed with mental health issues, of which 2 committed suicide and 3 attempted suicide. Commissioners, there are no provisions in hospital facilities for trans persons to be accommodated according to their gender identity. GTU has recorded from 2015 to 2016 6 young trans women who were hospitalized and placed in the male ward at public health institutions, which do not correspond with their gender identity. This has led to psychological frustration and resulted in trans persons self-discharging from the hospitals without completing their medical treatment.
Amidst rising youth unemployment, lack of access to justice and equality before the law, limited youth participation in governance, among other issues, young people's access to sexual and reproductive health services, comprehensive sexuality education for in-school youth, and the reintegration of adolescent mothers into schools have been placed on the backburner of the government for far too long. Evaluations by the Guyana Responsible Parenthood Association, GRPA, have shown that programs on sexuality education can help youth delay the onset of sexual activity and risky sexual behavior. Moreover, research by the youth-led NGO Advocates for Youth shows that comprehensive sexuality education programs do not encourage teens to start having sexual intercourse early. The GRPA's evaluations of the publicly funded and implemented abstinence-only program, commonly known as the Health and Family Life Education Program, HFLE, ignores young people's basic human right to the highest attainable standard of health by denying them critical life-saving information and the fundamental public health principle of accurate, balanced sex education. Moreover, restrictive laws and policies that function to regulate young people's sexual identity and behavior have a disproportionately negative impact on young people who do not conform to dominant expectations about stereotypes and gender. LGBT youth are especially marginalized from accessing sexual and reproductive health services. Furthermore, Honorable Commissioners, sex videos have surfaced in the month of October 2014, showing a popular Georgetown High School students engaging in risky sexual behaviors. Again, last month, February 2017, another set of videos surfaced again and went viral on social media. To date, the Ministry of Education has not taken any decisive action to tackle the issue from occurring again. Interestingly, however, the Ministry of Education finds it convenient to allow a radical Christian hate group like the Arizona-based Faithful Word Baptist Church, which is well known globally for preaching divisive messages, vilifying other religions, while promoting discrimination and homophobia, to enter several Georgetown high schools just a few weeks ago to preach during instructional periods. This very group, Honorable Commissioners, was banned by governments of Malawi, South Africa, and the United Kingdom. The GRPA believes that instead of brainwashing students with hate, which is clothed in the verbiage of religious views, the same time wasted could have been used to educate and empower young people through comprehensive sexuality education with critical life-saving information to better inform conscious decision-making as relates to their sexuality. According to the State of the World Population 2013 report by the United Nations Population Fund, Guyana has the second highest rate of teenage pregnancy, with 97 out of every 1,000 girls between the ages of 15 to 19 giving birth. Despite this, the government of Guyana is yet to introduce a comprehensive reintegration policy for pregnant and parenting adolescent girls to be able to continue their secondary education in public schools. According to a survey conducted by the Guyana Responsible Parenthood Association in the month December 2015, which examined the sexual knowledge, attitudes, and practices among Guyanese youth aged 14 to 25, it was found that out of a total of 392 youth from 8 of the 10 regions of Guyana, the majority, or 69% of sexually active youth, did report using condoms during their most sexual encounter. However, a worrying 29% were not using condoms while having sex. Approximately 19% of those stated that the reason for not using condoms was because they and or their partner did not have any. The GRPA believes that the government of Guyana, specifically the Ministry of Education, continues to violate the rights of children and young people, which are enshrined in the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. The right to education, the right to protection from discrimination, the right to enjoy the highest attainable health standard, the right to access to health facilities, information, and family planning are all threatened. These young women are denied their constitutional right to education and fall out of the system because there's no public policy or system in place to support their re-entry into the school system. This is further compounded by the situation of disempowerment, poverty, and abuse. The right to access health services are basic human rights. It was the late Nelson Mandela who once eloquently postulated that, and I quote, "To deny people their human rights is to challenge their very humanity." How long will Guyana continue to challenge the humanity of its people? How long will Guyana continue to turn a blind eye to the death-dealing situation of vulnerable adolescents and youth? The time is now to make a new move to advance the situation of young people for a better Guyana. I thank you so much.
The Constitution of Guyana, being the supreme law, states that the future of Guyana belongs to its young people, and Guyanese 35 years and younger account for 68.8% of Guyana's population, according to the 2015 National Youth Policy. In fact, work on the youth policy began with the previous administration, but a draft came to realization when the coalition government took office. The government held a 2-day working session with youth groups across Guyana to finalize a draft policy, a final policy that was never seen until it was presented to the National Assembly and adopted on October 13, 2016. The document is still not available to the public. Before the advent of the youth policy, local media reported grave human rights violations against youth in Guyana. In October 2009, a 15-year-old boy, while under interrogation by police, had his genitals doused in flammable liquid and set on fire. 2 police officers that tortured the teenager were promoted in 2015, even though they were both found liable for torture but never convicted. In another case, a police constable in September 2016 fired his gun indiscriminately in a crowded area, trying to immobilize an unarmed 17-year-old boy whom he deemed, in his mind, a criminal. A 52-year-old indigenous woman was shot instead, and the 17-year-old blamed for firing the shot. Further investigation showed that the police constable was never in a shootout with the 17-year-old, as he claimed. The officer was reportedly transferred to another department and was never criminally charged. These are the experiences of Guyanese youth navigating a system of behavioral and systematic shortcomings which needs revamping. And although complaints against police officers can be filed through the Police Complaint Authority and the Office of Professional Responsibility, both agencies at times rely on the Guyana Police Force to conduct investigations into complaints against its own officers. And as it relates to the detention of juveniles, a 2016 U.S. State Department report on Guyana notes that officials still hold offenders ages 16 years and older with the adult prison population. In fact, upon reaching 18 years old, juveniles are transferred to an adult prison, more than likely Georgetown's Camp Street prison, which is already overcrowded. An overcrowded prison is a dangerous place for young people. In March 2016, 17 prisoners burned to death in a fire at the same overcrowded prison. The Youth Council wishes to commend the government of Guyana for considering issues related to youth in contact with the law in the national youth policy. The government has indicated its willingness to enhance legal supported interventions to pre-adolescent children ages 10 to 14 years old to reduce the likelihood of delinquency and criminality, and providing decentralized legal advice and services for young people in conflict with the law. Still, Guyana's national youth policy needs to be actualized, and police and judicial officers must be sensitized and trained as part of this actualization. The promised National Youth Empowerment Action Plan needs to be crafted and implemented. The action plan should put mechanisms in place to ensure updated records of youth who have been in contact with the law and monitor the progress of their rehabilitation and care. The Youth Council also wishes to commend the government of Guyana for moving the process forward to develop the 2016 draft of the Juvenile Justice Bill. So far, the draft bill has been shared with civil society and consultations were held, and discussions so far have focused on areas such as alternative sentencing, the removal of status offenses such as wandering, and increasing the age of criminal responsibility. However, the state should put off speaking glowingly about this draft juvenile justice bill. Some procedural and diversion measures need revision. For instance, the burden is placed on the juvenile to show why he or she should be detained. It is the state's responsibility to prove guilt. The Youth Council recommends that independent child rights and youth-based organizations serve on the proposed Juvenile Justice Committee as a mechanism to check and balance the state's transparency, accountability, and respect for the rights of those youth in contact with the law. In addition to the government facilitating more youth-centered policies, laws, and training police and judicial officers, the Youth Council calls for a more progressive, rights-based, and action-oriented approach for change and betterment of young people in Guyana. There are several shortcomings in the youth policy which ignore the human rights of young people. While the policy recognizes LGBT youth are underserved, it does not outline how to address LGBT youth issues. It goes on to reference equality for youth, but does not discuss pregnant adolescent mothers and their reintegration into schools and non-discrimination against LGBT students. The document mentions sexual orientation and/or gender identity, but there are no commitments to give support and resources needed to ease the plights of LGBT youth. These are clear gaps that the National Youth Council and its member organizations, which include fellow petitioners SASOD and YAM, would have recommended for amendment if the policy in its final draft was shared with us as key stakeholders before adoption. Thank you.
Commissioners, for the State Party, these are the proposed recommendations to the government. For the Ministry of Education, update the Ministry of Education's policy on the discipline of teachers, code of conduct, to include sexual orientation and gender identity as a protective clause from abuse and discrimination. Finalize and implement a national sexual and reproductive health policy. Establish and implement a reintegration policy for pregnant and parenting adolescent and teenage girls to complete their secondary education. With consultation from civil society organizations and stakeholders of the education system, the Ministry of Education should integrate and implement comprehensive sexuality education in the public school system, as well as maintain secularism in the public schools. The Ministry of Legal Affairs, the need to include sexual orientation and gender identity as grounds for discrimination in the Prevention of Discrimination Act of 1997. Also repeal laws that criminalizes cross-dressing and laws that criminalizes same-sex intimacy between consenting adult men in private. The Juvenile Justice Bill needs to be finalized with a monitoring and evaluation component in the bill. Young offenders 16 and 17 years old should not be held in prisons, but in juvenile detention centers. For the Ministry of Social Protection, conduct sensitization job training programs on gender, sexuality, and human rights for all public servants. Prevent children from coming in contact with the law by education scale up through provisions of targeted services such as entrepreneurship and technical skills. For the Ministry of Public Security, implement training for police ranks. Also, for the investment in the Police Complaint Authority and Office for Professional Responsibility, as well as the inclusion of independent civil society observers in those services. Finally, we request the Commission to follow up on these human rights violations, particularly through the rapporteurship on the rights of the LGBTI people, children, and women in the form of visits, country and thematic reports, and press releases. Commissioners, all, thank you very much for hearing us.
Thank you very much. I'm sure you'll agree with me, representative of the state. We ought to commend these young people on their well-constructed and thought-out presentation. I do thank you. Proud of you. Now you have a tough job to do.
Thank you, Madam President, distinguished members of the Inter-American Commission, petitioners, ladies and gentlemen. My name is John Chester Innes. I am the First Secretary, alternate representative of the Permanent Mission of Guyana to the OAS. I have the task this morning of representing the Guyana government in relation to the hearing brought before the Commission. Firstly, please allow me to apologize for the absence of Dr. Riadin Senali, our ambassador, and the permanent representative of Guyana. His absence today comes as a result of the exigent circumstances which currently necessitates him being at another very important event. Madam President, when Guyana joined its hemispheric neighbors in 1991, it pledged by extension to observe and uphold the principles of the organization. And Guyana is also, as we all know, a state party to the Universal Human Rights Instruments, including the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, the International Covenant on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, the International Covenant Against Torture and Other Cruel, Inhumane, or Degrading Treatment, and has participated as a member of the international community and as a state party in international legal instruments in good faith. The government of Guyana has taken note of the petition brought by ChildLink Inc., the Guyana National Youth Council, the Guyana National the Guyana Responsible Parenthood Association's Youth Advocacy Movement, and the Society Against Sexual Orientation Discrimination. And the permanent mission takes note of the pertinent points raised and promises to bring these important issues to the attention of the government with a view to addressing these in its report submission. The government desires to provide a comprehensive response to the issues raised, and in closing, we apologize profusely for not being able to do so at today's sitting. As such, the permanent mission of Guyana, on behalf of the government, is requesting the indulgence of the Commission in allowing a reasonable time frame within which to submit the government response, and again offers its apologies for being unable to do so here today. Thank you very much.
I do extend my thanks to the state of Guyana and the message from the government and the request of the government. We do accept that, and we do ask that we have written answers submitted to us whenever possible, so that we have a comprehensive picture from both sides of what the situation is. And indeed, we will monitor the situation. And Guyana does have a reasonable time, which we will not fix today, but which we will expect the state will abide by. And if we do not hear from you in our interpretation of a reasonable time, we will be after you. So I'm sure that because of the clarity of the submission of the young petitioners, that it will be easier for the state to make its response. I am the rapporteur for Guyana, the country rapporteur for Guyana, and of women, and of Afro-descendant rights, and Guyana is a black country, which I rather like. I haven't been there in a long time, and I will, as country rapporteur, expect to visit Guyana, not only for the problems of youth, and in that regard, my sister commissioner will probably join me in a visit, because she's the rapporteur on children and young persons. And there are other, up to now, I must admit, the attention in relation to Guyana has been in relation to extractive industries and its effects. But as we can see, like all other countries in the region and in the Caribbean, we have this type of problem to deal with. Young persons are struggling to find their true identities and to live a life of proper dignity, which is rather difficult. In relation to my rapporteurship on Afro-descendants, I put on the plate right now for the attention of the state of Guyana the request, very strongly worded from me on behalf of the Commission, that Guyana considers its early signing and ratification of the OAS Convention Against Racism, Racial Discrimination, and all forms of intolerance, which would give some protection for some of the points raised in your submission. I am concerned that the provisions you relate to, the conduct or code of conduct for teachers, does not have in it, does not include gender or sexual orientation, which does in fact exclude too many persons from protection. In addition to that, I wanted to mention the fact that one is rather concerned about the reaction of the police to young persons, the lack of reaction of the Ministry of Education to the videos which have been circulated in social media about sexual entanglements, which is very harmful to young persons. Indeed, I think they're harmful to older folk, because once it's there, it's there. And young persons, lots of them are not yet fully formed mentally to realize the adverse effect that this can have on their lives. And in lots of instances, they're not the ones responsible for putting it out there. Because some cases in Jamaica, they were put out by adult males. In fact, one was a taxi driver who encouraged certain sexual behavior in his vehicle and videotaped it and put it out on social media. So young persons must be protected. And in relation to their detention and imprisonment, in any way or form, remember, detention of young persons has to be a last, final resort. It is not an act which falls within the normal criminal system as one would treat with adults. They cannot be locked up except as a final, final resort. They must, in fact, if they are picked up by the police, have the facility to have immediate release on bail through the very police hierarchy who hold them. But these are all things I'm sure the state of Guyana will include in its response, and we'll be happy to do that. With that, I call on my sister commissioner to give her interventions. Thank you. In Spanish? You need, yeah.
Para español.
Sí. So that all of you can have. You have to plug the speakers into this. Yeah. And the channel for English is 7. Can you hear? Can you hear the interpretation? One can. You can?
Yes or no?
They're saying. Number 7. Channel. Yes. Yes?
Muchas gracias, señora presidenta, comisionada, my sister, Margaret. Quiero saludar a los peticionarios cuando veo a una juventud sentada en una mesa comunicándole a una organización como la nuestra, que es la responsable de la protección de los derechos de todas las personas, ciudadanos y ciudadanas del continente. Me llena de mucha complacencia ver esos rostros de juventud. Agradecer de una manera muy particular a la representación del Estado de Guyana, porque nos da, aún en estas condiciones de no tener una información completa para presentarnos en el día de hoy, el compromiso de prepararnos una documentación con información suficiente que nos permita hacer un análisis de los planteamientos que han hecho los peticionarios en el día de hoy, las recomendaciones que expresamente y muy puntualmente piden y dan para que el gobierno de Guyana se exprese. Yo quiero, Margaret ya adelantó unos puntos que tenía anotados, así que no los voy a precisar. Solo voy a identificar para el Estado, reconociendo lo que señaló el representante, el secretario del la misión, la responsabilidad y el compromiso que hoy tiene el Estado al haber ratificado convenios internacionales en materia de derechos humanos y en particular derechos humanos de los niños, niñas y adolescentes. En este grupo de los adolescentes, un primer tramo de la juventud está allí y representa un momento trascendente en la vida de las personas. Toda expresión de violencia para niños, niñas y adolescentes, en cualquiera de sus formas, impacta, destruye los proyectos de vida que pueden estar en su visión del mundo, en su visión de ser humano, de persona. Entonces, para nosotros eso es importante y las cosas que se han dicho son expresiones de violencia en una u en otra categoría. Existe una comisión, consejo en materia de juventud. Yo creo que es importante y me gustaría que el Estado pudiera evaluar lo que representa para la organización estatal de todas las instituciones, si ellas, las instituciones, responden a la estructura de un sistema que garantice de una manera integral la protección de todos los derechos de los niños, niñas y adolescentes. Creo que eso es un tema que hoy en el continente estamos evaluando en un informe en la Comisión Interamericana. Vamos a tener una oportunidad en finales de abril en México de convocar a los estados y también a la sociedad civil a hacer un análisis de la efectividad de los sistemas que deben tener los estados. Ese es un mandato de la Convención sobre los Derechos del Niño, que garantice una articulación de todas las instituciones que tienen la responsabilidad de atender los derechos. Secciones, salud, educación, policía, seguridad, justicia. Eso tiene que estar articulado para que la respuesta sea integral e integrada. Y dar entonces a ese concepto de derechos humanos. Los jóvenes son titulares de los derechos porque son sujetos de derecho. Entonces, ese reconocimiento es básico para que la policía, por ejemplo, sea consciente de la responsabilidad que tiene. Pero además en el sistema de justicia, la no impunidad frente a la no respuesta de las autoridades para la satisfacción de los derechos. Yo, en materia de justicia penal, me parece que es clave los principios que la Convención consagra, la búsqueda de una respuesta de justicia restaurativa para formar a los adolescentes. Esa es responsabilidad de los adultos. La formación de los adolescentes, los adolescentes, ¿quién los forma? los tiene que formar el sistema educativo, los adultos que tienen que tener una visión de esta condición de sujetos de derechos. Y concluyo aquí, señora presidenta, pidiéndole al Estado una respuesta integral, porque no se trata de una institución, se trata de un sistema que debe funcionar en la respuesta que hoy los jóvenes de Guyana nos presentan en esta petición, en esta audiencia. Gracias.
Thank you very much. Normally, after we have intervened, we call on the parties to make a final statement. Do you wish to make a final statement? Okay. Could you, I'll give you 5 minutes, but that's a long time. If you can curtail it, I'll be happy. And would the state like to say a few words finally after the finish?
No, Madam President.
I know, I think you've done well.
Commissioners, Mr. Innes has assured us that the state will be responding, and we're looking forward to that response. And for the dialogue, of course, and working with the government in addressing these issues. We share your sentiments. And because of this, we understand Guyana's commitment to international agreements, but we urge the government to commit to its people. We thank the government for addressing these issues and keeping dialogue open. That's one thing the government will continue to do as we move forward in our society. But we are asking for action. These policies exist. The policies need to be strengthened. As for laws, you know, we need to implement all these laws to protect our citizens, protect our young persons. That's my final statement. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I have to mention this again. I am really proud of your presentations. Thank you. You see, leaders in Guyana, there they are. There they are. Thank you so very much. Let me just mention one thing, which I don't think either of us. This is the sexual and reproductive education. It has to start from the earliest point, when the child starts asking questions in that regard. And I agree with your statements. It has people who think that they're encouraging early sexuality are incorrect. What encourages early sexuality is ignorance. So when the children know about sex and sexual reproductive health, they tend to make concerned and reliable and in decisions in that regard. So thank you so very much. Thank you so very much from the state as well. It gives my heart, makes my heart warm to find that you came here and explained the position of the state and that you will respond. That being said, this hearing is at an end. Thank you.